Now, is that process by ordinance? Are you required to do that even when you know that there's no responsible owner?
That's the legal.
That's the legal process. And what is the county's role in this when you take control of the building?
So when the county takes judgment to a property, the property's been inspected both before and then it is also inspected again after they take judgment. If my memory serves me correctly, this building was actually originally occupied. We were working with the owner of the property who was trying to pay off the delinquency. That obviously did not work out, so we did what we call a lockout. A lockout is a type of eviction in which individuals' belongings are preserved in the property that allows individuals that we are unfortunately in position to evict to come back and get their property when they find a new location. During that period of time, we went to the property on a weekly basis to make sure it was secure. For my DGS reports, we secured and then re-secured this property no less than a half a dozen times during the time that it was in our ownership. I do not have any record of a direct contact to the county related to the issues that you just described.
So I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in here. So there seems that there's a disconnect then because the first phone calls are probably they're going to go out to our police. If you guys were there and you did it at least half a dozen times, and I've heard reports that there was at least probably about 25 reports that there were squatters in that building. So somewhere here we're not connecting the dots. Like if it's being checked on at least weekly and it's continually being boarded up, and the police department is also getting calls for them, and from what I understand they were actually getting calls that day, the day the fire occurred, for squatters. So the weekly checks aren't keeping the squatters out, but it seems like the city and the county aren't communicating that we have a building, one, that is not unsafe, correct? So this building it's a habitable building.
That's correct.
It is fully furnished habitable building because the owner's actual property is inside of it.
I don't know if the owner came back to claim all of their
So
property.
from what I understand, she was supposed to claim her property the next Friday after the fire. That's what she had set up with the county, was to claim her property the following Friday, which obviously didn't happen. But there seems that there's some kind of a disconnect here because we have a building that is habitable, that's furnished, that has a red X on it, that's getting police complaints, that's getting reboarded up by the county, that buildings and codes doesn't have full details on. So I'm kind of curious how this works together.
Properties in this condition, and the reason that we don't is because we used to, and feedback on that was that we shouldn't, because there was a view in the communities where we were doing this that boarding things up was not the correct way to go, because one, the board ups were not that much better than just securing the property as is, and neighbors didn't like the look that it obviously gave to the property. So we secure the property as is, and if there's something wrong with, let's say, the locks or something of that nature, we repair those things and secure the property in that way.
Okay.
I'd just like to point out, I was checking the police department's log on calls for that address. Anytime somebody calls the station or dispatch or 911 and asks for a call to service for that address, it goes in and it's easily checkable. And we do not have that volume of calls that you're talking about.
Okay.
The last couple months, there was a couple that were basically for officers having street encounters outside that had nothing to do with anybody calling us about it.
Okay.
There was one call in July that had to do with people coming in and out of the building. An officer got there in a fairly timely fashion, and people told him that whatever the situation was had been resolved. He checked the building. He didn't find anything anything untoward as far as the thing being unsecured. And he went so far as, I just spoke with him today, went so far as to speak with the person who actually called us for that call, and that person said they'd left the area, they were sleeping, they didn't want to talk to us anymore. There's nothing more he can do. But this is going back several months.
Okay.
We do not have calls for that building for squatters. They're just not there. And speaking with the beat officer, he said it was not on his radar. He did not respond to calls therefore, and he's hooked up with the neighborhood association email list and everything. And so this, no one had brought this to his attention that this was an issue.
Okay.
So,
I find this question interesting, especially with the access. And I'm disappointed in the response from the county. We're more concerned about aesthetics instead of physical safety. These buildings are going to be inhabited by junkies, squatters, homeless people, nowhere else to go. They're going to climb in and try to make a home. Okay? Now, unless we board these buildings out, all the adjacent properties are subject to risk. Okay? So I find this whole discussion somewhat, as you said, disconnected and silly. I mean, if the landlord doesn't want to take care of the property, he's not paying his taxes, you foreclosed on the property, you are exposing the entire neighborhoods to a situation like we already had on 24 Myrtle Avenue. Now, we lost a house that we owned for 100 years. This is not acceptable. So you need to do something to disconnect this. Building codes, somebody has to be responsible to creating a situation that these buildings cannot be accessed. Period.
I just have one follow-up question. Can somebody, so why was this building tagged with an X?
We talked with our fire investigators. They were investigating an area around, I believe it was 13 Myrtle Avenue, and they were encountered by residents there who had told them that the building was unsecured. So they went and investigated that situation. They found the basement area to be unsecured. The door was open and the building was accessible to the outside. So they did a visual inspection of the property, and they found that the property was, there were issues with the means of egress in and out of the structure, just from the visual that they made through the doors and the windows. And that's part of the International Fire Code that qualifies a building to be placarded. So that was the reason for the placarding of that particular piece of property. So it's not just the structural stability of the building, but it's also a protection factor for first responders and for any civilians that may enter or exit the building. And if there are issues with entering and exiting the building, that the building should be placarded.
Sorry.
Sir, I heard you say a number of things about the investigation. I think as a member of the family whose house got burned down, there was no investigation of this particular incident. The Shanson investigators were over there, and they were not allowed to go into the buildings even after the fire was over. We had no real cause of the fire. Some of us were in the street, my brother and other people were in the street, and they know somebody came out of that building. Nobody has talked to that individual. The individual was treated at the hospital. There has been no real investigation of how or why this fire got started.
Well, ma'am, there is an ongoing investigation. It's, our fire investigators are working in conjunction with the Albany Police Department and the Office of Fire Prevention and Control, which is routine for any large-scale fire. So our fire investigators are working with these agencies to make a determination of the cause and origin. So right now, because it's an open investigation, it's classified right now as undetermined and open. So we're not at liberty to get into too many details on it, but there is a very detailed investigation being
Can you give me a time frame when that investigation is going to be done?
that we'd have to, we'll have to work, again, it's something that with the multi-agencies we'll have to get together to work on that, because there are different pieces of the puzzle that each each particular agency adds to the investigation.
And then who will be privy to that investigation, the paperwork and the report on that? How does that work? Does it go through this organization and you contact us? Are you gonna contact the homeowners who are affected? What happens?
At this point, I guess it would be more of a police, the police, I believe, would be the lead investigating agency on this. But again, we're working with, the fire department is working with them as well as with the Office of Fire Prevention and Control. So once the situation is closed, I believe the insurance company, I would guess would.
I'd like to say, I just want to echo basically what the chief director was saying. Just before the meeting, I spoke with our detective lieutenant in charge of our criminal investigation unit, who's investigating it, and there is a very active investigation going on. And we have a sense of what happened, but there's a lot of moving pieces. As the chief said, it is an active investigation, so we really can't comment too much. Hopefully, the time the commenting will come if there's an end to the investigation in one couple different ways. But right now, I really can't comment on it, but there is a very active investigation. The department's taking it very seriously, and there's a lot of investigative leads, interviews being done. It's not being ignored. They're tackling it.
And then the other part of my question is, when you guys are the police department, one of the first things you see in fire is you douse the houses that are not yet affected or burning for prevention. That wasn't done. People sat and watched those houses burn down. How did that happen?
No, ma'am, I can address part of that.
Everyone speak up a little bit.
Sorry.
Sure.
That's okay.
Sure. I can address part of the question as to the tactics. Our fire department, we drill regularly on this type of situation. Unfortunately, it's a common situation throughout the country. So fire departments, we have a tactical procedure for different types of buildings, for each type of building, for different types of structures. Row frame houses are very difficult fire to attack and to manage. They are older structures. The construction type is what we term balloon construction, which leaves many open voids for fire to travel. Fire travels the path of least resistance. Fire doubles its size every 30 seconds. So there was a considerable fire load throughout those structures there. Upon arrival, our firefighters found that there was fire not only in one structure, but there was fire, active fire, heavy fire in 3 structures at that point in time. And it was all, the majority of the fire was up into the cockloft or small attic area that had, once the fire went up, and it spread across. Because it just, again, as I said, it follows the path of least resistance. So there was a heavy volume of fire and a lot of area covered with fire at the time of arrival for our firefighters. So they faced a daunting task right from the start, right from when they arrived.
We understand that for 2 hours, is that right? 2 hours, there were people in the street, and they did not hook up the hoses for at least an hour after the fire started. Someone claimed they couldn't find the fire hydrants. They started down on Grand Street, and there's a fire hydrant right on the corner of Myrtle and Phillip. I mean, I don't understand how my mother's house burned out.
Well, ma'am, this is a tactical situation that we face. There's a lot of factors that come into play. Depending on the fire hydrant location, what water main they're working off of, so we cannot draw too much off of one particular water main. We were working in conjunction with the water department to utilize as many areas of water resources as possible. So I can assure you, the fire operation started immediately upon arrival of our companies. So.
That's not what they said in the street. And people were there. In the
Crystal.
street watching them.
Hi, I'm Crystal Pope, and I lived at 16 Myrtle in the basement. Now, I'm going to answer your question if you don't mind. I'm going to help you guys out because, like she said, it's a disconnect. It needs to be more teamwork. Now, the X's that they put on the houses, this house had more stuff than you can imagine. This woman, mother was a pack rat. So when the fire started, that's what caused a lot of it to blow. Now, the squatters, yeah, they were people using drugs and everything that night because it was a neighbor that had to unnail the wooden door to let them run out. That's how the fire got started. It was 3 people in there. It was 2 men, one white, one Caucasian man, one minority woman, and it was one ethnic black man that was in there. They be on Grand Street. Now, the reason why I know, because I live there. I've seen them. Yes, it has been media calls me regarding that. Now, the fire, I'm kind of not happy because me and Muhammad, we watched our house burn from the front and the back. Not only that, we were disrespected and yelled at by one of the fire officials, saying that they were doing the best that they were. But I'm wondering, why are you busting out? Why are you on the 3rd floor of 16 Myrtle when the fire started at 20, when you need to be busting out the windows on the 3rd floor of 18, putting out 20? Because you came from 16 and you didn't do anything. But the fire officials didn't know I was a resident, and I watched. That was it was really sad to sit there and watch your fire officials just say, forget it. I even had to run up to one of the trucks in the back and tell them, no, the fire, they thought the fire was out. No, it wasn't. They didn't care. You know, they really did not care, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I'm really disappointed in the Albany Fire Department. Seriously, I'm from Troy, and I had never been through this ever in my life. This is the first time living in Albany that I have lost everything. I'm a business owner. I have a makeup cosmetic in my house. I don't know where to start, where to begin. I can't put money in my pocket. And I hate to say it, but I'm gonna be honest, that you guys ruined it. Because it could have been saved if it was more teamwork and a little bit more care and concern for the community. I mean, at the X's in the houses, if you're gonna board them up with this stuff in it, that's something you shouldn't do. You should evacuate the whole building. Let the owner building people get what they want and get it out. And then exit where nobody's able to come in. And not nail up something where somebody can go in and out of, because that makes it room for squatters to squat.
Let Mo talk and then let the panel respond. I'm gonna let him speak in the middle. Can you talk up a little louder?
Yeah, I'm one of the residents that was burnt out also. Crystal lived in the basement, I lived on the 1st floor. And again, I more or less, co-sign everything Crystal says. We watched the fire from the front and the back. I mean, if I never fought fires before, but if I had to, and I've been saying, and if I had to give a grade, I would say that the firefighters, they city would do a poor job. Yeah. I mean, even as she was saying in the back, we went around back, and the fire was spreading to 18. It started at 20, it was spreading to 18. I lived at 16, and you could see it on the 1st floor, and we're like, the fire is, really spreading, and it was just starting, and there was a hose on the ground. There was a truck in the back, and he was, spraying the roof, okay. And there was about 6 or 7 firefighters, and they were just kind of milling around, so to speak, okay. And even at one point they did take the hose, and I heard it, and they started spraying them into the 1st floor of building 18. But then they stopped, and they backed off, right? And again, I was there, I mean, I don't like to, again, I never fought fires. I know it's not an easy job, okay? But again, because I moved my vehicle right from when the fire first started, Crystal came and woke me. She didn't wake me up. I was about to go to bed. It was about 11:30, and she said, it's a fire. And I went out and I went out. And I was like, oh, okay, what I saw it was at 20. And again, it's 2 doors down, and I was like, someone believed that it wasn't in the building of 16, because it's like, oh, okay, so, it's at 20, they'll put it out before it spreads to 16. But they didn't, okay? The fire actually, 20 was the middle building, the building with the X, and it spread it upwards to 22, 24. Then it came back, and 18, 16 was the last house that actually began to burn, and it was kind of on the roof. Somebody else made the comment that how come foam wasn't used, because it was primarily a roof fire primarily because the fire jumped from roof to roof, okay? And, you know, I mean, I didn't think about that, but I don't know whether, you know, foam is used or not. I mean, again, I'm not, you know, that's not my expertise, right? But again, so not only that, as I said, I was moving my vehicle down the street, you know, out of the path for the fire trucks, and it took a while before the first truck came. Because again, when we came out of my apartment, I'm looking, it was right there at 20, and it was just right there on the right. It was right, just strictly at 20 on the second floor. You could see, and you could see the redness of the fire, but it wasn't blazing out through the windows or anything like that. And so again, I felt like, okay, you know, they should be able to contain this before it gets to my apartment. I mean, hey, you know, nobody wants to be burned out. And, but again, and we stood there and waited, where's the fire trucks? You know, we're good 15, where's the, and when they came, and because I moved my vehicle down to the street out of the line of fire, and when the truck came, and again, I don't mean to throw shade on anyone or anything like that, but they actually stopped at the corner. The fire truck stopped at the corner, and they started putting the hose on the hydrant at the corner. And I was like, the fire up the street. And again, you know, with all, you know, like I said, I don't like to show shade on anybody, but the firefighter responded, is there a hydrant up there? Yeah, there's a hydrant in the middle of every block. I mean, so, and with that, okay, he took the, so they put the hose on the hydrant there, and they left it there, which was fine. Because I'm thinking, well, yeah, okay, well, because they're probably gonna need that hydrant and then need the one up the street, which is basically right across the street from the fire. But that hose sat there unused for over an hour, maybe close to an hour and a half, maybe close to 2 hours before they finally used the first hose, the fire hydrant that was there at the corner. Okay, after the fire got out of control, that's when they finally they started using that hose. And again, after they got there, 15, 20 minutes after they got there, and before any water was actually placed on the fire, okay, it was another good 15 minutes or so. You was there, Howard, with 15, because I think they had problems with the cable wires and getting it up there. So I'm saying from the time I left my apartment, it was a good half an hour before water was actually put on the fire, okay? And so again, you know, there was like, and you know, around back, I mean, there was one truck back there, and I guess Crystal, what did you say, hour and a half, 2 hours for the other backup trucks came.
About
in the
2
back.
hours.
But by that time, they had lost control, okay? The fire was blazing like crazy. From there, it had jumped up to 24. Okay, I mean, but to sum it up as far as that part goes, it was like, had they shown the same sense of urgency then as they from the beginning, I think, you know, all those structures didn't have to burn. You know, it was only then after you guys lost control that it was like, then there was a full all-out effort to put the fire out. So. And again, and going back to the police reports and everything about, you know, the back of the building was never boarded up, okay? And many neighbors, I saw people going in and out, and because I spoke to one of my neighbors, and I was like, you know, we need to call. He said, I've called, and you know, I've called them, and more or less nothing has happened. Okay, he's not here. I mean, I could, you know, I'm sure, you know, at some point we could always get a statement from him, but, so the front was, yeah, we know that the front was boarded up, but why wasn't the back boarded up simultaneously? Okay, and also, there is a relative of one of the neighbors who told me, again, you know, I mean, I'll see if she's willing to go on record with this, but she said that the police came there one day, and she said she witnessed this, and she actually saw the police take 6 people out of that abandoned place, okay? And again, it wasn't boarded up, and I mean, again, I find out if these people wouldn't go on record, but this is what she told me. She said she saw the police take 6 people out of the building, okay? So, you know, so that's, that's my piece that I wanted to add to it, okay?
I'll let you, and then we'll let them respond. Okay.
From the initial dispatch time to the arrival time for the fire department was under 4 minutes. It's 3 minutes and 57 seconds, according to the computer assisted dispatch records. The initial company, we did an after-action report immediately following the fire with our first 2 companies, our first arriving companies, and they explained their tactics and their decisions. The first arriving company, upon arrival, gave a report of a heavy fire condition. They stretched the hose lines, they stretched our initial hose lines in. From the way that it was described and what we saw afterwards, they made correct tactical decisions. The fire had a great jump on them. Unfortunately, the initial report told them that, or the initial report that they gave was that fire had extended to 2 additional buildings and was making its way into the 3rd building. So that was the initial arrival report from our units that arrived on the scene. And again, that was, you know, just under 4 minutes from the dispatch.
It's not. That can't possibly be true. It's not true.
A quick clarification question. What's the dispatch time? Is that from the time that the first person called you about it? Or is that from the time that you
that was the time. That was the time from when the communication center alerted the firefighters.
What was the time the communication center got the call at the time of the fire?
I'd have to
actual
look that.
question is.
Yeah.
From the time that somebody called, that you made, like, it's one thing to be like, hey, leave now and then drive. It's a 4-minute drive. That's great. No, I
Correct.
understand that. But from the time that the call got there to the time that people showed up, that's what the actual problem is. That's what they're asking. Also, are those reports foilable or are they just public information? If you're talking about your records, do they have to be foiled or are they just something that can be asked?
Could you repeat the question? We can't hear anything over here.
Sorry.
That's okay. My question was, one was, he was saying that from the time of dispatch till the time that the fire truck got there was 4 minutes. And I was like, great, but from the time that the communication center received the call till the time that the fire truck got there, he has no idea. Then the second question I asked was, is this information, are these reports foilable, which means can you get them under the Freedom of Information law? Because he said that he had reports that the firefighters gave to him that he read that were reported shortly after the fire. And so he said yes, and then I asked, are they just public record? Are you able to just get them, or do you have to foil them?
I believe they are foiled.
Okay, so they're not public, like I can't just call you like, hey, can you share that report with me? That'd be great. He said I would have to put it in the report. Thanks.
I'm sitting here in utter amazement, and thank you for coming, because I used to live at 24 Myrtle Avenue, and love it. And you're absolutely correct.
Could you speak up a little?
There's a big fire hydrant directly across from 20. So can you tell me how much water you dispense from that fire hydrant? Put out that fire, you said you stretched out cables or hoses, but judging from what everybody said, how much water came out?
How much water?
Water was utilized to try to contain, control, put out the fire. I know on Charles Street, there's probably none, because that's a black alley. If there is one, I wouldn't know where it was.
It's actually right at the very top of Charles Street. It's right at Philip and Charles. Yep, it's right at the corner.
So relatively close.
And that was utilized.
Yes.
Both were utilized, correct.
Is there any measurements of gallons of water that were used to try to attempt to put out this fire at 20? Or anywhere? Because see, this is what I'm hearing, gentlemen. Basically, you made a strategic decision that this is a poor neighborhood, these are rundown houses, so instead of wasting our efforts, we'll just sit here and, according to Muhammad and other people, and watch a controlled fire burn.
No, sir, we attack all fire. We're an aggressive fire department, and we do the best that we can.
I know you, I didn't say you did the best, I didn't accuse you of that. You just made a tactical decision to allow a controlled fire to burn. Now, I have a question for the mayor.
Excuse me, but I just need to make a clarification that you just made a statement with which no one at this table agrees and that does not reflect anything that I have seen in my 6 years as mayor from the public servants that serve the city. So I just want to be clear
thank you.
that I don't agree with that statement.
Okay, but thank you.
But
You
go
have the right,
ahead.
you have the right to disagree, but I'm just clearing for my neighbors and other victims. But here we are. Here's my next question. Why were all these buildings torn down in 12 hours? Why weren't insurance inspectors and adjusters given an opportunity to see if any of this was rebuilt? I don't understand that.
They
From the
were,
time-
they were actively collapsing. You were not able to gain access to them safely.
Well, the police went in, the police went in and got some of my aunt's stuff out.
I went in and got some of your
Aunt's stuff out. So therefore, it wasn't really wildly collapsing.
No. Can I say something? Richard,
He's right.
seriously, we wouldn't have got anything if it wasn't for him.
Okay.
I
So-
mean, I lived in a basement. He risked his life.
No, you're missing the point.
I'm just saying that,
I'm not, you're missing my point. My point is if Richard could run in and grab stuff, then it wasn't all falling apart at one time. So my issue is basically, we did not have the opportunity that our insurance adjusters come in and appraise and determine whether or not we could rebuild. The
No,
whole
the
thing was
buildings
fault.
were collapsing. You can smell the fire, the things were there. I'm not understanding. When he went in and got in what he can go in and get, if he could take 2 steps in and a picture was right there, he was taking it and he was going out and that's it.
Look, I'm not just.
It's like,
questioning
we're
whether-
mad, but we.
But to answer your question, once the buildings are assessed by the engineer, if they're deemed imminent threat to public safety, the public is not going in there. That's anybody in the public.
Okay, I understand not.
And that's not our
But
engineer.
do we?
Can I just correct you? We have to hire, when we hire a structural engineer, independent engineers. We don't have these types of engineers on staff. When we have an incident like this, any incident like this, whether it's a fire or somebody calls and says that there's a, the house next door is empty and the roof is collapsed, we call in an engineer. That engineer makes a determination. They then assume legal liability for the consequences of anything that happens to that building. So when they make the determination that it is a hazard to a public safety hazard, right? Then we have to follow the law about removing that hazard. So
That report
we don't
readily
make that
available?
decision.
Is that report readily available to the public? Can we see that report? Can we give it to our insurance
Yes.
adjusters?
Yes.
How do we get it?
You have to flood to our office. But I'll give you.
Okay, thank you.
And your insurance adjuster should be familiar with the process.
Mrs. Jackson? Sure.
I don't even know that man back there, but I'm telling you, he told the truth. Everything he said was the truth. I don't care what the fire department said the truth, I'm sorry, but that is exactly the truth. They were not there. I was standing out in the street, screaming to say, where's the fire department? I mean, and that took me to walk from the back of my house to the front of it. Nobody was there. So what that man said, he said every single thing was true. They did not show up on time. I mean, within time, fast time. They're around the corner. The fire department's around the corner from us. I lost the whole house, so you know how I feel. I'm really ticked off, seriously. But that man told the truth. I don't even know him. He lives down the street someplace. I don't even know him. But
I know you.
And even that, let my son stand up and tell you, he was there. He was there. When he came back and told me that we lost the roof or something happened to the house. And I said, well, it was out when I left. There was no smoke, there was no fire. next thing I know, we lost the house. How did that happen? But whatever you told him, thank you, because he told you the truth. And there's nothing really,
Yeah.
I don't want to be answered.
My name's Howard Jackson.
Speak up, Howard, just so that.
We're raised at 24 Myrtle Avenue. My mother's lived there since 1928. And my observation, being as objective as I can, was the same as most. I said, oh, it's not even gonna reach 24 by the time, they train what they have to do with 20 and whatever adjacent houses. It was a very slowly developing fire. I don't know what was happening in the back. It was raging in the back, I know. And there was a discernible lack of hustle, urgency, like most said. That really, are they letting this burn, or that's what I saw. And that was about midnight. By about 1:30, there's still, now it's raging, and standing next to the mayor says, these houses are gonna have to come down. And that seemed to be sort of a snap judgment, without the assistance of an engineer or whoever's charged with doing that. And 18 hours later, they were demolishing the structure.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen there. They were cooperative as far as allowing my mother to get photos and some long-held treasures from the house, but that's it. It raises more questions than it answers. I wanted to know basically about the investigation part. Are there suspects? Was it deemed arson or was it accidental? How can you determine that if they were destroyed? 24 was damaged, heavily damaged, but the city destroyed it. That's all I got.
I'll come back to you.
My only question, it's pretty terrible to hear about everybody who lost their place. But then the secondary reason why I came is, what is the plan moving forward? There are plenty of houses with X's in the neighborhood. It seems like clearly there's things that don't, the county does this, the police get called, do they come out every week? What's going on? I have a 3-year-old who we talk about fire every day now. She's really scared. We live 2 blocks away. She's like, is the fire gonna come to our house? How do we know the fire's gonna come to our house? I'm thinking oh, I'm gonna call her preschool and see if they do a fire department for her so she can get her confidence. And people are scared about what's gonna happen now. And I don't mean to disrespect what's happening in this particular community by asking that question.
Yeah.
One more thing to say to the county, you have this policy with the X buildings.
Red X's.
Red
County is
X's.
not the ones putting the red X's.
Okay, well, whoever puts the X's on the buildings, I think there ought to be another design for that. And I understand this is policy. Isn't there a sign on the building that says that the emergency vehicles or emergency services are not to be enlisted until such time as, what's the thing on the door? Remember we talked about it?
Which,
On the X houses, there's a sign that says in emergency situations, it's a delayed. Now,
I'm sorry.
What I'm trying to say is, I think the policy that you developed, it creates a bad precedence for the neighborhood because that's just since anybody who's living near an X house now feels that perhaps there's gonna be this issue with fire. And so we're past it, what happened to us. But what about the rest of the neighborhood? If you have this policy that you're just gonna let some of these X houses burn, what about the people who live next door? What about the?
I know what you're talking about. So,
Yeah.
from what I understand from the policy for the X houses is that that's to signify that first responders should not enter because there is a hazard to it. So, from what I've read, it says that the firefighting commences from the outside and the entry is not made. So, if you could please clarify that.
The placards are designed, we follow the International Fire Code. The state has adopted the International Fire Code, which we comply with. So that the design of the placard is standardized throughout the country, really. And, for all those that follow the International Code, we cannot change the design of the placard. The size of the placard is mandated by the International Fire Code. So that is all. Those are the rules that we follow. The designations mean that there are different designations for the different placards. The X on the building designates that there is some structural instability and/or imminent hazard in the structure for any first responder or civilian that might be entering that premises. So it's not just for firefighters. So it's for any civilian or public servant, public safety official that might be entering that structure.
Why an X? Why can't there be something more aesthetically pleasing than an X run to these neighborhoods? It's just, I mean, I was born and raised here, and I lived in other communities. That X, like, really puts to me, a bad spot in your neighborhood. You trying to redevelop and you want to move into a community, you ride through it and you see this great big X. Why can't it be something else?
Well, maybe you have a very valid concern and a very valid question. But we follow the international code, and that's the standards that we must comply with.
Hold on a second.
We cannot change it.
Assemblyman?
Well, it is a relatively new law. It was adopted by New York State. And if you drive to Colony, Mississauga, Troy, Schenectady, you will see red X's. So it is a standard that was adopted under state law, that we are required to.
The question.
I agree with you though. I don't know who designed it, because I don't think that they took into consideration the impact on the neighborhoods where we're required to.
It's not X to the building, it's almost X to the whole neighborhood. I don't want to work somewhere where there's X's everywhere. I mean, I don't get it.
I agree.
I guess the question that I had asked earlier that maybe I wasn't clear on was, how can a determination on the cause of the fire be made, or was it made that quickly within those 18 hours after the fire was put out and that they started demolition? And if not, there is little or no evidence left to examine. My cousin said that we had to fill out a form for NEFQ, the Northeast Fire Cause Unit or something. And one of the questions was, what was the order number, or what was the demolition? And Henry Johnson, they said, well, we don't have one. I mean, so who gave that directive, or who gave that order to do that? I understand the reasoning why. So we came back at 2 in the afternoon and they're taking our banisters off. It's a little confusing.
I have something to say. Maybe you guys can answer this for me. I can identify 3 people. I can take you down the street just to help us, because we need some type of closure. I know the reason why and what they were doing in that house. So, I mean, I'm willing to do whatever it has to do so that me and my people, we can sleep peacefully at night and somebody pays for all losses, because, we have to have some type of closure. Because every day walking down Grand Street and looking at these junkies in the face that I lost my house for, I can't accept that. I can't accept watching a fire department just say, forget it. You know what I mean? I can't. And I'm willing to put my step forward in and do anything I have to do and ride in the back of the car, do whatever I do. I will definitely point them out for you. I mean, if that's something that we can do, I'm willing to do it.
Mo first.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this for the closing.
A little louder. Sorry.
Yeah,
I know you're soft spoken.
And I can, yeah, they tell me I do have some voice, so I need to use it, right? Yeah, so, I just, just in closing, I wanted to say this, and to go along with what Crystal was saying also. I mean, to make sure it's clear, right, that the night of the fire, I mean, somebody mentioned it, but I'm not sure we all took it in. There was actually somebody trapped in the house. And once the neighbor right across the street from me, they pulled off the plywood off the front to let that person out, okay, of the burning house, okay? And so again, in conjunction with what, Crystal was saying, I want to say too that, it is Richard, right? Yeah, and I mean, hats off, kudos to Richard, the same incredible because he was like, he did a stand-up job. He went into my apartment and got, some of my paperwork out. He went in not once, but twice. And then later on that day, he even fed me. He brought back fries and hamburgers and stuff. And it was good. Those are the best fries I had. So, hats off to Richard. He did a stand-up job. And in conjunction with my, neighbor over here, again, the thing with the whole water issue, I mean, again, that one hose it lay dormant for maybe a good 90 minutes, okay? I mean, really, because we went around back, we were back there for a few, and came back around front.
I think we spent more time in the back.
Maybe so. I mean, it could have been close to 2 hours. And when we came back, that hose connected down the street was still flat, okay? I go on record for that, okay, piece, okay? But again, so in conjunction with it, my neighbors, the whole situation with the water. But I mean, I just, like for me, I mean, I know everybody has a difficult job and this, that, and the other, and I'm just thankful for Richard. He was the greatest. He really, he really helped us out.
And can I just speak to the comment that I made? When I arrived, it was actually even later than 1:45. It was, the fire had been burning for a long time, and I've seen too many of these. And we've had them in situations where a fire started in an occupied house, and we've had them in situations where fires started in unoccupied houses. It's the hardest part of what we have to do because it's devastating. It's incredibly devastating. And unfortunately, when I've seen it happen, it has resulted in us losing multiple houses. And it breaks my heart, and it devastates a neighborhood, it devastates families, and it's the most helpless feeling, right, that you can have, as you stand and watch that happen. And so I apologize. I did not mean that your house was going to necessarily come down. We hoped against hope that it would be able to be contained. And as I walked behind that building, it was just, it's a hard thing to see. And it's devastating for every family, but in particular your family, who I care very much about, and who I know personally, to see that devastation. And I'm so sorry for the loss. And for all of them.
Holly?
I thought at one point that there was some legislation about changing the red access so that these buildings are on a database so that the fire department and other responders would have that, and that there wasn't necessarily the need for the X itself. I thought that was some legislation that was being proposed. Is that still around?
So there's a couple things. And let me just for a second, most of you know I was mayor of the homes for 13 years. If you know anything about the homes, we know how to do fires up too. We have a lot. And so you're absolutely right to be upset, frustrated. Personally, 35 years ago, I sat across the street and watched a fire after 3 hours come over a street and burn down my residence and my business. And I kept saying, what in God's name are they doing? But the reality is this, in serving 13 years as mayor, I recognize the work that the fire department does. Their number one priority is your safety. Nobody dies. That's the most important. Make sure the pets get out of the house whenever possible. Because that is very emotional, isn't it? And they also have to make sure they don't put themselves in harm's way. Because we know if any of that happened, the public would really know. There is tactical measures that the department talks about. The chief, I know the chief, they do a review to make sure they did everything possible. It's still, unfortunately, as laypersons, we don't know how to put out a fire. I've heard many of you say that. I heard a few people say, well, there was wires up here. Well, you can't raise something up, put out a fire with live wires there. So there's a lot of different things. So you're right to be frustrated. And, I share with the mayor, and I think everybody does, the fact that we feel and understand the pain you're going through. And we can't, unfortunately, take back those memories. We can't, you've got the memories, but we can't put those buildings back. The reality is, what do we do going forward? And that's where, and I can say this comfortably because I work with the city officials and the county officials. I think the city is doing an awful lot in regards to, number one, identifying the properties. I know the mayor gave direction to Sam to go out there and identify these vacant buildings. They've got a very, as accurate as you can see, database of properties that are vacant or abandoned, which is very helpful to have your facts and data first to quantify how do we deal with the problem. Mayor and the county executive have been very helpful to me, along with Senator Breslin, in moving legislation forward to expedite the foreclosure of these properties. And foreclosure is a very difficult issue. The county doesn't really cherish foreclosing on properties and telling people to leave their household. They, in all fairness, try to work with them. And I think if you were on that part where family member lost a job, couldn't pay their taxes for a period of time, but the county was willing to work with you to keep you in your household, you would appreciate that opportunity. At the same token, when it comes to vacant and abandoned properties, the bottom line is somebody said, I'm done with this property, I want nothing to do with it. The legislation that we have before the governor that we're hoping will be signed is to allow the tax foreclosing entity like the county in this situation, or like the city of Troy in Troy, to take properties that are delinquent in taxes for 1 year and allow them to be foreclosed on in a much quicker fashion. Now, the goal is, and they're actually white X's, they're not red X's. Red background with a white X's. They're not attractive. The goal is to reduce that inventory of properties that carry those X's. That's the goal. That's the goal behind this legislation, because as we start to have less and less properties going into that state, the city is able to move their redevelopment efforts forward to help strengthen the neighborhood and strengthen the community. The other aspect that you're talking about is a very difficult one. We can't legislate it per se. It's very difficult, and the goal is those X's, placards, as the chief calls them, they're there to protect our first responders. I think we'd all feel terrible if they weren't up there and a police officer or firefighter went into that building and got injured or lost their life. I think we'd all be in an uproar about that. They're there to protect them and tell them what's wrong with this building. And yes, in many circumstances, we'll say stay out of that building and fight the fire from an exterior only. Do not go into that building by any stretch of imagination. One of the hopes, and I've tried to, through legislation, but we're having challenges with this, is that if technology got to where it could be, and it's just not there yet, if every fire truck was outfitted with, and every police officer, and every code officer was outfitted with technology where they could pull up a database, and someday it'll happen on this phone, where they can pull up to 126 Grand Street and say, oh, okay, don't go in that building. Then maybe we can have that discussion about not placing placards. But that's something that We have to be at a point where we have the technology in place that we're comfortable with, that we're confident in. And it's not just us elected officials, more importantly, it's the first responders, whether it's police, fire, or code, or EMTs for that matter, who are going into that building. And the technology is not there yet to have that comfort level, because we hate to go to a system where somebody got hurt. You know darn well the whole conversation about one police officer walking in and falling through a floor and dying would be something that none of us would want to be listening to. So, legislation before the governor, I think it's not the be-all, end-all. It's a large step forward. And I have to say thanks to the mayor and thanks to the county executive for really being helpful in regards to providing the data, to help size up the argument, to help put the policy before the governor for consideration.
On Myrtle Avenue, we have two properties directly across from the fire. One directly in front of the fire that has an exit. You have a couple further down the street with exits on it. And I appreciate your comments because we do need to go forward. So my question is about going forward. Voice has already left the bar. So it's locking it now. Okay? My issue is, what are you going to do to secure those buildings so that we do not have a repeat of what we had on our side of the street occurring on the opposite side of the street as well as the rest of the city?
I will not speak to that, but I'm gonna say something, just to help whoever's gonna answer that question. So I also have the distinction, or maybe non-distinction, of being on Norway Capital Center. And as you know, we had a building collapse in downtown last year. Every single day of the week, whether it's the weekday or the weekend, our executive director would go down to that building and e-commerce. Every single day we change people out of that building. And that's after putting up an 8-foot fence and boarding up everything. Bottom line is, one of the challenges we have, one, how the buildings get to where they are, is human behavior, people who don't care about the community. And the other problem we have is people who have much more bigger problems in life are just more happier than happy to load themselves into a building and call it in. And I think it's a very delicate issue. We know there's a homeless problem. We know there's people who choose to be homeless. And the same token, we try to get them out, but they keep coming back. And I'll leave it at that.
So with respect to those buildings, as our coach director can tell you, we are ensuring that those buildings are secured and boarded. We are also looking at technology. Technology can't solve everything, but my friend Mayor of Schenectady is testing some technology that is run by solar power, and it provides a motion sensor to detect motion with smoke within a building. And they very graciously, the mayor contacted me after the fire and offered me one of the units. We're determining where we're going to place it, but another tool in the toolbox would be for us to mandate that anyone that has a vacant building pay to install this technology that would then be connected to our dispatch, so that when there is movement or fire, we have the ability to immediately respond and either get people out of the building, if there are vagrants in the building, or respond to a fire if there is smoke that's detected in that building. We are also, though, really focusing on how do we reduce the number of Red X buildings. So, Sam Wells is still here. Sam can tell you a little bit about these Red X buildings, but they're not necessarily what you think they are. As a matter of fact, more than 2/3 of the property owners of Red X buildings are paying their property taxes. So that's why the point that John makes about speeding up the foreclosure process, it's only one part of the issue that we see with some of these vacant buildings. And so we've applied for some grants. We've been working on putting in a structure in place to address these issues. If they were easy to address, we would have figured it out. But what we have found is that ownership issues are very complex. we have owners that are LLCs in Brooklyn, where we can't get a person. So then we have to take them to court, and the legal system is very, it favors the property rights of property owners. So for us to be able to get to a point where we can take a building is a very arduous process. And so we identified that as something that needs to change, and that needs to be policy changes that happen at a higher level than us, which is why we partner with, Senator Breslin, with our assembly member, and also looking at our own codes and our own ordinances to strengthen those so that we can move more quickly to get these blighted buildings back into productive use. And so we've applied, and we know we need more manpower, more people who are focused solely on this issue. But if you have questions about sort of the inventory that we're talking about, Sam is here to even address that.
I have a follow-up question to what you were saying on that technology from Schenectady. If we can't get the landlord to do what he needs to do, to maintain the building, keep the building in a livable condition, how do you think we're getting paid for technology without some type of legal
So part of it,
punishment
right.
associated with that?
So part of what we're dealing with, right, is a faucet that has been open wide and creating these issues for decades. And so we have properties now, some of which have been vacant for 30 years. But the other part of this issue is turning off the faucet. And so we want to make sure that we're doing both, right? Because we'll always just be sweeping up a mess if we don't turn off the faucet. And so the technology that I'm talking about is a turning off the faucet, looking at that as one of many things that we have to do, but that is a turn off the faucet tactic. So that as we register vacant buildings, we have this requirement. But I agree with you. You just as they're not all tax delinquent, they're not all. We also need to undo this LLC loophole where if the law allows for an entity to own a property and take no human responsibility for it, and that has to change.
Yes, Ms. Jackson.
I just wanted to know about the code that the next day after the fire, that the houses were torn down or started to being torn down at 6 o'clock at night. Now, what code is that? That you weren't even able to get back in the house to get anything?
That's right. So,
Yeah.
once the house has been deemed an issue that needs to be taken down, we have 24 hours to have started that work. So the work can take longer than the 24 hours to do it all down. We have to have started the demolition within that time.
Aren't you required to notify the homeowner?
I'm sorry?
Aren't you required to notify the homeowner?
Yeah, when they're accessible, not always.
I was. Nobody told me at all. They were just there, and at 6 o'clock at night. I mean, that's my problem. At night, the fire was this day and the house was gone the next day, or at least being torn down the next day. I couldn't even go in there and get my insurance bills. And what is that? I mean,
Well,
I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, you weren't gonna go in there and get your
No,
regardless.
no.
We did talk to you about what was happening.
Yeah, yeah. But I just want everybody to know that too. They were there at 6 o'clock in the evening, starting to tear down the house.
Yeah, we had to start as soon as we were able to once the gas was terminated.
That's all.
Question for the fire chief.
Yes, sir.
As part of your report, okay, that you do and you review your post-action work, in that report, is there a matrix? A metric, or not matrix, an indicator, come back to water use. In that report, does it say how much water was used to fight that fire? In your reports that you do as your post-action reports?
No, sir. There is no.
We don't need it.
I'm sorry?
We don't need it.
No, we don't need it. We do not meter the water usage of the fire station.
Okay.
I have just like one thing, from what I've seen and how I feel personally to everybody on the panel right now, I think it needs to be a little bit more structure and a little bit more teamwork and probably some reconstruction with your fire officials. I don't know if they have to go through the whole thing again, or maybe something like this just might have had them like, oh my God, and you never know what a person is thinking. So I'm just saying from me to you, from a victim, I just feel that maybe they need to be retrained with a little bit more structure when something devastating like this happens. I mean, that's just my opinion. It's nobody else's house burns down like ours did. You don't feel like somebody's like, are they really just letting it burn? Because that's how we felt. And it's okay to learn. It's okay to take education no matter how old you get. It's all right to get retrained or get reprogrammed. Maybe that's just something sometimes we don't want to admit to it. But I feel that they do need to be retrained, and it needs to be more structure when something devastating like this happens in Albany, so that victims don't feel how I feel.
Absolutely. We do, after any major incident, we do post-incident reviews. So we always try and learn something. We'll review to see what we did and then what our actions were, what our good points were, what maybe our soft points were. But that happens after every occurrence.
I just want to thank everybody for being so open and candid about something that I know is really painful, because it is important for us to hear directly from people who are impacted. And, I'm not going to speak for the fire chief, for the police chief, for the fire department, but oftentimes we get so focused on the technical aspects of what it is that we do and what we're required to do on a day-to-day basis. And we don't necessarily have to deal with day 2 and day 3 and day 4. And that's what you're living with. But I think it helps us all to do our jobs better when we have the opportunity like this to hear directly from you, as hard as it is to hear. It's important that we be willing to sit here and listen and learn from what we've heard and go back and do better. I hope it's clear that, our commitment is to go back and do better. The status quo is not okay with us. I'm not gonna defend the red X's. I'm not gonna defend vacant buildings. I'm not gonna defend if you felt disrespected, because that's how you felt, right? So we're gonna do better, and we have to do better.
Okay, so where do we go from here? What happens in the neighborhood? What's the plan for the redevelopment of those areas? I mean, I was in Albany, I worked for Albany back in the 70s under the urban renewal program. Okay, so there's no more urban renewal. Is this urban renewal 2020? We're just gonna burn the city down? Or do we have a game plan for these areas with the ex-houses, the whole community development piece?
So, first of all, I want to speak about these fires and the devastation of these fires. They don't just happen in low-income neighborhoods. When we have houses that are connected and that share a common attic, we have the potential for those fires to spread, no matter where those buildings are. But with respect to our lower-income neighborhoods, where we have high concentrations of vacant buildings, and now we have 5 empty lots, each of them has a different owner, it requires us to really look at what resources we can be requesting to bring to bear on creating a plan for that block and for that neighborhood. And we are actively working on that right now. I have maps that I am looking at that identify every vacant lot, every vacant property, every property that is delinquent in their taxes, every property that is owned by a government entity. Most of those are owned by the county and the land bank, so that we can look at what we can propose that's a holistic approach, right? We have some buildings that are being rehabilitated just on their own. The one on the corner, that was a private, owner who rehabilitated that home. So there is some private investment that's taking place. That's not going to be enough. But we're gonna have to talk to each individual property owner about what they want to do. Because we don't, it's not as though we can come in and say, we're going to build 5 row houses on this property. We don't own that property. We own, the county owns one of those lots, but we don't own any of the other properties. So, it's just, it is, we're working on it actively now. As I said, as Sam knows, he's been spending hours and hours and hours, refining the data, and, that is our next step.
Can we go back to the disconnect that Danielle brought up earlier about the relationship between Albany County, which is the foreclosing entity? There are buildings all over the south end that are in some kind of legal limbo, where the foreclosure may be years away. Then there are others that have gotten close. And yet, in this case, I heard that the police did not know who to contact, who was responsible for number 20 at that point. Can we talk about better communications between Albany County and Albany City so that this sort of thing at least doesn't have to happen?
I mean,
Yeah, because we don't know why we didn't know that you owned that building.
so we notify the city when we take judgment of properties.
But sometimes you don't take actual possession until you're ready to turn them over to the land bank or something like that.
No, we take this is a legal distinction, but we take judgment to the property. And the reason you do that is to protect county taxpayers, which are all citizens of the city, are residents of the county as well, same difference, to protect them from liability. So we take judgment of the property, and then when the property is transferred to either a private citizen, land bank, or any other receiver of the property, we do a quick claim deed through to the new owner. We communicate all the data that the mayor referred to, that Mr. Wells has in his database, comes from the county, and we think we do a pretty good job communicating in terms of if there's an issue in a county-owned property, and anyone can call. You have on many occasions call me or anyone on our team. I have a couple colleagues here who specialize in various aspects of our processes to determine the status of a property. In terms of what you referred to about the 4-year cycle of delinquency for foreclosure, again, as the mayor mentioned, the vast majority of blighted, to use a word that most people use, blighted properties in the city pay their taxes. I don't know why. We find it a bit odd ourselves. And there's no way for us to approach that. The law that the Assemblyman just referred to will hopefully give us that tool for the city to certify it for us, a list of properties that are that fall under the rules of the new law, and allow us to move them up in the foreclosure process. And frankly, I think everyone should know the 4-year process, aside from those vacant and blighted properties, is actually a benefit, because the county runs a payment program for around 500 individuals at any given time. The majority of those individuals are within the city of Albany and are property owners, where they can pay their taxes back, and that prevents the county from foreclosing on them. In the history of that program, we've only ever foreclosed on one of the properties, and that, I mean, I forget who it was, but somebody mentioned, the county does not want to take your properties. Sorry, someone. I don't want to take your property. It's not right. It is right in the sense of the law, but it's best for properties to be owned by responsible individuals, and for them to be given an opportunity to pay their taxes. So, I would simply say that there was a very unfortunate incident that happened. It's terrible. We feel terrible about it. We have talked to the city about what can we do to prevent this from happening. I know the gentleman over here said we need to improve our board ups. Again, our process now was community informed. We can always change that again to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to prevent squatters from getting into the buildings. And frankly, as far as I'm concerned, that's what we have to do. It's a matter of, all right, how can we increase the number of times that we're visiting properties that we take judgment to? Make sure that the real-time information is getting to the city so they know when we take judgment, and that the police officers know that they can call the county if necessary. I would encourage citizens, as it sounds like you already did, to call the police if there's somebody in the building. We don't know who's in the building. For your own safety, it makes sense that you would call the police when our folks go to do inspections and they find somebody in the building that we've already secured. They also go to law enforcement. So that's the most prudent way of going about that process.
So I would just like to, now you've said that the county is willing to maybe reevaluate their choices in boarding.
Yeah.
I understand that there was probably people that didn't like the boards on the front, but the front is less accessible, or at least harder to sneak into than the back. So, you know, from what I understand from this incident, and I know that there's a house next door to yours, that the back has been, and there's actually one, it might be that one right next to yours, where you can actually look through the windows and see the doors open in the back.
Rear's been accessible for
Right. And I think that house, like, not too long ago, they like kicked the entire door frame in that one down, and they boarded up the front, but the back wasn't boarded up. And I'm not saying that that particular one is one that the county has, but 20 was one that the county has, and if the back of it was left unsecure, none of us are going, at least, I mean, I speak for myself, but I'm not really concerned about boards on the back of a house. In fact, I'd prefer it there because at night, anybody can get through, especially if they're, you know, this has had a vacant car, had an abandoned vehicle, and there was stuff in there. Very easy for somebody to sneak past even alert neighbors to get into a back of a building, where it's much harder on the front of the building where you have people coming in and out, you have street lamps. It's a lot harder to break into the front. I mean, it happens, but it's still, there's a higher chance of being seen breaking into the front of a house than there is the back. So if we're going to take the community's concerns, and I think we have to put them together, I think that not boarding is too far, but certainly boarding at minimum the back, and then the front if it's in a neighborhood where it's continually broken into. Obviously, if this house is repeatedly unsecure, then some other step has to be taken, because the steps that are currently being taken are not enough. So if you're going and you're locking the house up and it's getting broken into again, and you're locking it up and it's getting broken into again, there's got to be a point where you say, okay, we understand the community does not want boards, but for their safety, we have no other choice. Like, I think that's an arguable point. So even if the community comes back and says, we said we didn't want boards, you can say, well, this building's been broken into 4 times. At the 4th time, we switched to boards to ensure that there isn't a 5th, 6th, 7th time. You know, I think that is a reasonable way to address concerns about boarding.
Yes, I could not agree more. I would also just point out that the boards aren't necessarily going to prevent you from getting in.
Yes, but they're better than none.
Yeah,
like,
I understand. That is exactly what is something that we need to consider. That's
We're
perfectly
going
fine.
from boards and possibly putting bars or steel mesh over it.
So
that people can't pull them open, pry them open.
So then we run into, so again, this is.
I understand it's an expense.
No, that's actually not the issue. Expense considerations are real, but so again, to show how this is something that's pretty well thought out, the problem is, for first responders, you need to make sure that they can get out. So if you put bars over an exit, and then a first responder gets trapped in a very bad situation, let's say a building is on fire, and they can't get out an exit, granted they have heavier tools than those individuals who are spotters, then that's not an okay way of securing someone. Does that make sense?
No, because if you have the airtime and some first responder, one is shooting nobody in there and not to go in. So,
right.
You know,
But they don't always listen.
Yeah,
And
okay, I'm
if
million,
they tell you, if someone tells them that
But that's not how it works. I wish it was.
someone believes that there could be people in the building, our first responders
sure everybody would agree that if there's a squatter in a building, they still want the first responder to try and rescue you.
Again, the issue was to make sure in some methodology, and plywood doesn't seem to be the choice methodology of keeping them out in the first place. That we find something in all this technology that we have and ways we can do something that these people can't.
So
doorways and so on and so forth.
So to answer your question, we don't have that technology to guarantee someone's not gonna. We don't have that.
I do want to add, there is a product out there, clearboarding that looked at. We still are trying to get a hold of it so we can test it out and ensure that our first responders can get out of it. It's clearboarding. It's essentially like it's like a thick, yeah, like a thick plastic covering. Yeah, it's like plexiglass to an extent. But previous concerns have been about escapability for our first responders, and we haven't been able to get a hold of a copy to test it out in one of our buildings. The land banks offered one of their buildings to use to test it out. We just haven't gotten a vendor to give us a free sample yet to try it out. But we're working on getting one of those.
Reasonable? That's gonna pay for one? One window? One door?
Certainly, we could, yeah.
So additionally, another point that I'd like us to, as we look for ways to fix or to address these issues, with those buildings, granted, we that lived in the neighborhood knew that there was a massive fire. Like, we were very, very well aware of that. And, we expected that if, depending on the condition of the house, they might come down. But we have Nixle. Like, why is there no notice when a building is taken down? I mean, I get a notice for the whatever race is running, but they're tearing 5 buildings down, and I get no notice. I'd like to see that we better communicate with our citizens when there is an emergency. I don't remember getting a Nixle alert that there was a fire, and I know that it was late at night, but I signed up for Nixle with the hopes that I would be alerted by that service. So I'd like to see it utilized. I'd like to get more alerts for things that I perceive as real danger than just a road closed for a race. So, and that's my, again, that's my personal opinion, but that's also from talking with other people, and it's been an issue that we've had with abandoned or red X buildings that have been torn down in our neighborhood that we, something like that demolition occurs and we're not notified.
You mean on the top corner of Myrtle Ave?
Yes, I do mean on the top corner of Myrtle Ave. And several other corners. Yes. So if we could put that into a plan going forward to ensure that there's better communication between the city and the residents in situations like that.
I had asked that a protocol be devised or written down and shared with everybody for when there are demolitions, even if they are emergency demolitions, and that could be added to that protocol?
Yes.
So, Chief, that's one of your action items.
Yes.
You don't need to speak to it, but
Okay.
the police department is the owner of Nixle.
Right.
And I know that this is something that has come up, so
Yeah.
we will take on
Yeah.
the charge of looking at our protocols to see how we can.
Yeah. As part of the, emergency demolition, you have a list of who you have to notify and what you have to do. So that could just be part of the notification, to give the police department the notification to send it out on Nixle.
So at least we can shut our windows.
Yeah. I do have one additional thing. Actually, and is there anyone that has any additional questions for the panel before I ask? So I would like to see one additional thing done in protocol, and that's how the city responds to the loss the families have. So after I requested that everybody be at this meeting, I started looking to see what these fires looked like in other places in the city. And what I found was very inconsistent response from the city over at least more than a decade of time. But in some cases, the city, speaks up and, encourages others to donate. Some situations, they even take toiletries and stuff like that. You know, in other situations, they've partnered with CEFCU. At least one of the fires, CEFCU matched the money, but the first $5,000. I saw thank yous to the Red Cross for their work, but I lacked the rest of the outreach, at least through what I could, you know, through social media, through press releases, anything like that, when it came to this fire that displaced 14 families. So if we're going to address fires one place, one way, we need to do the same everywhere, because every neighborhood deserves the same kind of outcrying from the city.
So, immediately in the aftermath of this incident, Peters called me. I told him what our protocol would be in terms of teaming up with United Way and Catholic Charities to raise funds. He said that you had already, that his group and your group were already teaming up to create a fund. The fund was created, so.
Right, and the city could have then said, you know, a village has set up a fund with CEFCU, or, you know, how they set it up, and, you know, these people have lost their families.
I mean, we
yes.
So, let me talk about the protocol, what happens.
Okay.
Every fire is different. Every situation is different. So we have situations where people are displaced by a fire. There was a fire up on New Scotland Avenue near St. Peter's Hospital. It displaced, it was 5 units. So it displaced 5 individuals, all of whom had some pretty serious challenges and were part of RSS. So these were supervised apartments. And so in that situation, RSS took responsibility for rehousing those individuals, and it would have been very inappropriate for us to have done more, right? It was there were, HIPAA and, privacy issues associated with that. We have had fires like the one on Bradford Street that impacted predominantly people who all belong to the same mosque. And so that mosque and that community took responsibility for raising funds and distributing money. And we had to come in and facilitate, make sure that everyone had access to those funds, not just the people who were members of that particular mosque. But that was how we facilitated that. So with this fire, as Brian said, our protocol is to contact the Red Cross first. The Red Cross comes in, they do the emergency response. They then follow up like they did with the Bradford Street fire, of bringing all the resources together so that individuals can come and figure out how to get their driver's license replaced, how to connect with services. And then typically we partner with United Way to create a fund for the fire victims. In this instance, again, I think it was a better choice. We like for that fundraising to happen closest to the people who are impacted. And so we're happy to help draw attention to that, to increase that funding. The fire that you're talking about on Park, where CEFCU was involved, that was my rookie mistake. So that was the city doing what Cahoe's gotten a lot of trouble for doing, which is the city should not be the one deciding and handling these funds. We want not-for-profits that do this, and have the connection to the community, determining and getting the money into the hands of the people that need it as quickly as possible.
And we did too, Danielle, just so you know.
I can't hear you.
We did make a number of referrals to the organizations, your organizations, when they call ACDA or they call us saying, how can we help? We send them.
Absolutely, but there's a difference between a referral when they've reached out and a request on behalf of. So I just want to make sure, and I appreciate that. I just want to make sure, and there's perception involved in this, and that if we're not careful with how it's perceived, it continues to be the same perception that we've had before, especially in neighborhoods that continue to feel like they're underserved.
I read it in the Times-Union. I saw it on all of the television stations to direct the funds to a village. So, I thought that you guys did a great job, but, you know, we're happy to echo that.
But
And
let me just add one piece to this. Historically, neighborhoods like ours have had to actually, fire that we had on Park Avenue before one you're talking about, which is maybe 7 or 8 years ago.
No, not that one. She's talking about the one up
Yeah,
by
I know.
Hackett.
But we had to actually work with those families and help them get settled after we raised the money. That was way out of our comfort zone. That was really difficult. So when this new organization called PROAD, Capital Region Organization Assisting Disaster, is that about
Got
right?
it.
Came into being. One of the things they did is they now have a fiduciary, United Way. And if I'd known that United Way was the fiduciary, bingo, I would have gone right there instead of having to tax our book people in the village. But the other important thing is that Catholic Charities, in this case, has taken on the task of resettling people and helping them get resettled. So the money that we raise is going directly to Catholic Charities, and they're going to be helping those families. And that's a much preferable system, I think, than a neighborhood trying to do it on its own or the city or whatever.
That's fine. I mean, that's our protocol.
That's precisely what I explained to you on the phone.
Yeah. And that I see that working, and we're having a press conference with them next week and turning over all the money and so on. So.
And that's how we respond to, you know,
Yeah.
had you not called and said, we're gonna start a fund, that is exactly what would have been implemented. So we're happy to do whatever, you know.
The other thing I
the
recommended
community wants,
to
but that's
the
great
PROAD
to hear.
folks, they had an after-action discussion, is they need to get to know the neighborhoods, because one of the things that nobody knew of the existence of this thing in the neighborhoods. So they need to make themselves known to CANA and all the neighborhood associations, and so that the other key thing about these fires is you have to start right away. You have to get on top of this, or things, for instance, you get all these clothes you don't want. All sorts of things happen if you're not right on top of it, and so that has to happen immediately, and the connection with the community has to happen immediately.
And when we have responded to other fires, we have found that going through the PROAD process is what we prefer. But again, we also want to be respectful of the community. But I do think maybe that education piece, so that neighborhoods understand this is here, it works, this is how it works, they're good partners, and you know, it helps us because, you know, we are, when we did a fire response with them, we were able to be very specific and say, we only want you to drop off, I think it was like underwear, and I forget what the other need was, but, you know, to be very specific, don't come and drop off, you know, all of the baby clothes that have been, you know, in your attic for 15 years. This is what the people who have been impacted by this need, and those needs have already been determined, which is great.
Which is the same thing I did. I took only the stuff that was needed, and people were very good about that. But maybe one of the things that we need going forward is we need to provide some kind of opportunity for collaboration or training that goes to the people in the neighborhood associations that are most likely to step up and start things afterwards. And maybe we do it in conjunction with CANA, and that's how we identify the folks that need to have that information readily available to them, so that when things happen, we're not stepping on each other, and we're actually doing something that's, you know, specific and together. So, you know, I think a lot of what occurred in this instance is lack of information sharing, and just, you know, we haven't sat down and figured out what the best way is to make sure that all the parties involved get what they need, and we can get it quickly. Like, I mean, there's not a lot of time in a crisis, and everybody wants to help, but if there aren't people that take up those reins, it just becomes chaos. So I think that you know, maybe we pull together, you know, and identify a person or a few people, I would say at least 2 people per neighborhood that is interested in being that point person. You have your person, your backup person, and then we get us all together in a room and we figure out how we respond, how that neighborhood responds after there is a significant incident.
just have like one question for, I'm one of the victims out of all the, unfortunately.
I can't hear you, Crystal.
I'm like one of the victims, so what do we do as far as, like you guys are talking about, the fundraising and money, this and that. How would we be known or notified about all this? How do you go about getting in touch with us? Like, have you guys got that in plan? Because there's a lot of people that don't have phones. They don't have, it's like, how are we gonna find out, where do we go now if we need this financial help?
Catholic Charities.
Okay.
Have you been in touch with Rita?
Okay.
Wilhelmina? Have you been in touch with Wilhelmina, that Catholic Charities? If you would give me a contact, I'll pass it on to her.
Okay, sure.
Anybody else as
She
well?
does have your information, so everyone that the Red Cross assisted that got direct financial assistance, I know you're on that list. I provided that list directly to Catholic Charities, so they're going through their process in
Okay,
terms of how to distribute it, but I guarantee you she has your name and contact
Okay,
information, so I know you have it.
All right, so we just go through Catholic Charities, so therefore Mo left, so I can inform Mo, get in touch with Catholic Charities, or just give them some time to get in touch with
I
us.
can send you an email with your
Okay, that's fine.
So,
For individuals-
don't sneak off yet.
Danielle, just to add,
yep.
so there are emergency resources available through social services through the county for qualified individuals as well. My colleague, Concrete Jenny, sitting in the back, specializes in that sort of thing. So it is something that is income qualified. But if there are individuals that you're working with that are victims and they qualify, we can assist as well. Many folks don't know what the county does, but we can help with that as well.
And again, I think that's another thing. Sorry.
Helpful is if you guys became part of the, I believe that you were
They
at
were.
the response.
They were at the response.
So your office has the name and contact information for every victim, so they can reach out.
So yeah, I mean, I think that goes back to that, just making sure that we all know what the pieces are, along with because they're, we can't all attend meetings and stuff like that, but if we at least know what's going on, the individual neighborhoods can also respond with the coalition.
That's the goal, yeah. We did get in touch and try to get an invitation to join the meeting that we're having tomorrow, which mind you is first of the very few meetings that we've had so far. It's kind of a brand new coalition that just kind of really got off the ground. And we do have it in our calendar to attend the Camden meeting in October as well, to be able to build those bridges across the community.
All right. Are there any other questions?
Not a question, but Haggis has a furniture bank that actively has furniture that kind of keep available for fire victims. So you would reach Haggis since we're having help with that.
So we would like to thank, and I know the Assemblyman had to go, and so did Building and Codes Director Rick LaJoy. So we definitely want to thank you guys for coming out and having this conversation with the community. We think it's really important on a lot of different levels, and hopefully we can address some of the issues that played a role in this situation happening, and reduce the chances of this set of circumstances or a similar set of circumstances creating a situation like this again in the future. So I want to thank you all for taking your time and hearing us out, and hearing the community's feelings on it, the fire victims' feelings on it, and we really do appreciate that. And thank you for everyone who joined us. Hopefully we'll have conversations like this in the future. There is a list of our upcoming meetings on the back table and a sign-in sheet for notifications for upcoming meetings. So thank you, everybody. Oh, and thank you, Chief Gregory, for giving us some space.
We also have an evaluation form.
Speak up, speak up.
We also, if you guys could fill out an evaluation form to help us make it better.